Richard sat at his desk in the empty house. The letter was dated October 17th, 1946, 16 months after Arline died. He'd written it but never sent it. Couldn't send it. She was gone. The Darline. It began. He always called her that. Dead for darling. He read his own words again. I adore you, sweetheart. I know how much you like to hear that, but I don't only write it because you like it. I write it because it makes me warm all over inside to write it to you. The problem was physics. Specifically, the problem was that physics told him she was gone. Completely, finally. Her atoms had dispersed. Her consciousness had ceased. There was no afterlife, no heaven, no way to reach her. But his heart didn't accept physics. His heart insisted she was still somewhere, still reachable, still listening. He looked at the equations on his blackboard. He'd been working on quantum electrodynamics, trying to understand how light and matter interact, trying to make sense of forces and particles and the fundamental nature of reality. And he kept thinking about black holes, about event horizons, about points of no return. Because that's what death was. An event horizon, a boundary you crossed and could never return from, a place where normal rules stopped applying. The concept was simple enough. A black hole formed when matter collapsed so completely that its gravity became inescapable. Even light couldn't escape, hence black. But what happened at the boundary? At the event horizon itself, Richard worked through the mathematics, the Schwarzschild radius, the point where escape velocity exceeded the speed of light. Cross that boundary and you were gone, trapped, unable to return. From outside, you'd see someone approaching the horizon slow down. Time dilation would make them appear to freeze. They'd never quite reach the boundary, would appear suspended forever, getting slower and slower, but never crossing. But from their perspective, they'd cross normally, wouldn't even notice the moment they passed the point of no return, would just keep falling inward. Two different realities, two different experiences of the same event, both true, both real. Richard thought about Arline's death. From his perspective, she'd been dying slowly, tuberculosis taking her bit by bit. He'd watched her fade, watched time slow down for her as she approached her own event horizon. And then she crossed, been gone, unreachable. But from her perspective, had she crossed normally? Was she somewhere now on the other side of that boundary, wondering why he couldn't follow, wondering why he seemed frozen, unable to reach her? The mathematics didn't answer these questions, but they suggested something about the nature of boundaries and perspectives and what gone really meant. Richard pulled out another letter, one he'd received from a colleague. It discussed the information paradox. If something fell into a black hole, what happened to the information that defined it? The quantum states, the precise arrangement of particles that made something unique? According to thermodynamics, information couldn't be destroyed, but according to black hole physics, anything that crossed the event horizon was gone, lost, destroyed. Both couldn't be true, but both appeared to be true. That was a paradox, and Richard hated paradoxes. They meant your understanding was incomplete. They meant reality was more complex than your equations suggested. He thought about Arline, about all the information that had defined her, her memories, her personality, her laugh, the specific way she'd looked at him, the exact tone of her voice when she said his name. Where had that information gone? When her body died, when her brain ceased function, where did the quantum states that defined Arline go? Physics said they dispersed, became part of other systems. The atoms that made her body would become part of soil, plants, other organisms. But the pattern, the specific arrangement, the information that made her her, that was gone, unless it wasn't, unless information really couldn't be destroyed, unless it was somewhere, somehow preserved. Richard wrote another section of his letter. It is such a terribly long time since I last wrote to you. Almost 2 years, but I know you'll excuse me because you understand how I am, stubborn and realistic, and I thought there was no sense to writing. 2 years. Time moved strangely after death, Sometimes it felt like our line had died yesterday. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. Time dilation of grief. He returned to the black hole equations, looked at what happened to time near the event horizon. From outside, time appeared to slow. From inside, time appeared normal, but space became strange. Past the event horizon, the roles of time and space reversed. You couldn't move backward in space toward the horizon you'd crossed. You could only move forward in time toward the singularity at the center. Movement became inevitable, unavoidable. Was that what death was? A place where time and space traded places, where you could no longer move in space back toward the living world, but you moved inexorably forward in time toward some ultimate conclusion. Richard didn't know, couldn't know. No information escaped the event horizon. No one returned to report what it was like inside. But the mathematics suggested structure, suggested that inside wasn't chaos or nothingness. It was a place with its own rules, its own geometry, its own reality, just unreachable from outside. But now I know, my darling wife, that it is right to do what I have delayed in doing, and that I have done so much in the past, Richard wrote. I want to tell you I love you. The problem with the event horizon was communication. Once someone crossed, they couldn't send signals back. Light couldn't escape. No information could return. But quantum mechanics suggested something interesting. Quantum entanglement. Two particles could be connected in such a way that measuring one instantly affected the other, no matter how far apart they were, even if one crossed an event horizon and the other didn't. The connection persisted. Einstein had called it spooky action at a distance, hated it, thought it meant quantum mechanics was incomplete, but experiments had proven it real. Particles remained connected across any distance, across any barrier, even theoretically across an event horizon. Richard and our line had been entangled, not just metaphorically, literally. They'd spent years together, shared spaces, exchanged atoms through breathing the same air. Their quantum states had become correlated. Did that connection persist after death, after she'd crossed her event horizon? Could information still pass between them through quantum channels even though classical communication was impossible? Physics didn't say yes, but it didn't say no either. The mathematics was ambiguous, the interpretation uncertain. And Richard chose to believe the interpretation that let him keep loving her. At the center of a black hole was the singularity, the point where all the infalling matter collected, where density became infinite, where the equations broke down completely. Nobody knew what happened at the singularity. The mathematics produced infinities. Nonsense. It meant the theory was incomplete, that something important was missing. Richard thought about this often, about how the most interesting things happened where theories broke down, where equations produced infinities, where you had to admit you didn't understand. Death was like that, a singularity in life, a point where normal rules stopped working, where equations broke down, where you had to admit you didn't understand. He tried to be rational about Aroline's death, tried to accept it, process it, move on, but grief didn't follow rational rules. Love didn't obey equations. The singularity of her absence had torn a hole in his life, warped everything around it, made normal things impossible, made simple things painful, and he couldn't predict what came next, couldn't calculate how to escape the pull, could only fall inward towards some unknown center. But there was something else, something Stephen Hawking would discover decades later. Black holes weren't perfectly black. They radiated, emitted particles, slowly evaporated. The mechanism was quantum. Virtual particles appeared at the event horizon. Usually they'd annihilate immediately, but sometimes one fell in while the other escaped. The escaping particle carried energy away. The black hole lost mass. Given enough time, any black hole would evaporate completely. The information inside would be released, would return to the universe. Death seemed permanent. But was it? Would information eventually escape? Would the quantum states that defined a person eventually radiate back out? Richard didn't know. wouldn't live to see Hawking's work, wouldn't know that black holes could die too. But he felt something similar. Grief radiating outward, memories escaping. The love he'd contained while she was alive now spreading into the universe, becoming something others could observe. His letter to Airline was that radiation, words escaping the event horizon of his grief, carrying information back to the world, proving something remained, proving the singularity hadn't destroyed everything. I find it hard to understand in my mind what it means to love you after you are dead, Richard wrote. But I still want to comfort and take care of you, and I want you to love me and care for me. This was the heart of it. The paradox he couldn't resolve. How do you love someone who's gone? How do you maintain a connection across an event horizon? How do you send messages that can't be received? Physics said it was impossible, but his heart did it anyway. Defied the equations, ignored the impossibility. Maybe that's what made him human. The ability to maintain connections that physics said shouldn't exist, to believe in things that mathematics couldn't prove, to love across boundaries that nothing could cross. I know you will assure me that I am foolish and that you want me to have full happiness and don't want to be in my way, he wrote. I'll bet you are surprised that I don't even have a girlfriend after 2 years, he continued. But you can't help it, darling, nor can I. I don't understand it, for I have met many girls and very nice ones, and I don't want to remain alone. But in 2 or 3 meetings, they all seem ashes. What happens inside a black hole? Nobody knows. The mathematics breaks down, the physics becomes uncertain, normal rules don't apply, but something happens. The matter doesn't cease to exist, it transforms, enters a state we can't observe or measure or understand, crosses a boundary into a realm we can't reach. Is it destroyed or preserved? Both? Neither? The question doesn't have an answer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What Richard learned from loving Airline after her death was that some questions don't need answers, some paradoxes don't need resolving, some event horizons don't need crossing. The love was real. The connection was real. Even if physics couldn't explain it, even if mathematics couldn't prove it, even if rationality couldn't justify it. He ended his letter, P.S. Please excuse my not mailing this, but I don't know your new address. That was the point. He didn't need to mail it, didn't need to cross the event horizon, didn't need to solve the paradox of loving someone who was gone. The letter existed, the love existed, the connection persisted. Somewhere in the quantum foam of reality, in the strange geometry past the point of no return, our line still existed too. Not reachable, not observable, not provable, but real. That's what happens inside a black hole. That's what exists past the event horizon. Not nothing, not destruction, just transformation into something we can't see or touch or understand, but something that's still there, still real, still connected to what remains outside. Richard kept the letter, kept writing to her, kept loving across the boundary, kept defying the physics that said it was impossible, because love was its own force, its own field, operating under rules that equations couldn't capture, creating connections that event horizons couldn't sever. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.